Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of Hollywood Breaks. This week, we get to welcome first film producer, Dallas Sonnier from Bonfire legend, and he's here to talk about his new film, Shut In, which I cannot recommend highly enough. It's a great film. Definitely should check it out. We get into a little bit of what we've always talked about here on Hollywood Breaks, the future of film, the future of theaters, and what's coming up next. So sit back and enjoy the ride. Welcome to Hollywood Breaks.
Very traditional American childhood growing up in Texas. Ended up finding out about USC Film School through an article that sort of profiled Jerry Bruckheimer in Playboy magazine. I had this cool dad who would go to 7-Eleven, like grab a Playboy for his high school son. I had one of those dads. So I was reading the article about Jerry Bruckheimer, and I realized this guy has produced every single one of my favorite movies at the time: Top Gun, Days of Thunder, all these great movies, and even The Rock and some of the movies in the 90s. I said, I want to be that guy. I want to be that. That's what I want to do. And so I realized the easiest way to do it, because I was still a sort of a kid growing up in a conservative neighborhood, very Bush-centric neighborhood in Dallas, was to go to film school. I mean, you got to go to college, right? I mean, you got to go do this and study it like a traditional student. And so I went to USC Film School. I actually got in at 16.
Wow.
Went early in the summertime, and then came back, finished high school, and then went out for undergrad. And it was a blast. This was right in the tail end of the 90s, when movies were still good. It ended up, I kind of came out of USC, and I needed a job. I wasn't ready to be entrepreneurial yet. I needed to learn the ropes. So I ended up becoming an assistant at UTA, United Talent Agency, which is one of the biggest talent agencies in Beverly Hills. Had a great time. I worked for agents who represented filmmakers, actors, things like that. Had a great time. Ended up transitioning out of that company with one of the partners there, who started a management company. And we can get into the difference between agents and managers, but essentially at this point in time, they're the same thing, right? They're all going after the same jobs and representing the same clients, and it's sort of the Wild West. And I was a really good manager. I discovered Greta Gerwig, Leslie Headland, Sean Christensen, Craig Zoller, all these different people really early on in their careers, and helped them sort of launch. Jenny Lumet, Jessica Goldberg, many, many people. Michael Starberry. I mean, if I had my client list today, if I was still managing, I'd have the hottest client list in town. And so it was a blast. I was really good at it, but I wanted to produce, and I had this relationship with Craig Zoller, and he had sold, with my help, many, many, many scripts. And there's my kid on Alexa. Sorry.
That's okay.
So
Zoom life, gotta love it.
We have a snow day today, so everyone's home.
Oh, that's right. You got your snowstorm down there. I forgot
exactly.
about that. That's right. Yeah.
So anyway, I basically said to Zoller, and I realized that if he didn't direct a movie, it was never going to happen for him, and frankly for me, at a level I wanted to, because he was and still is my favorite screenwriter. He wrote Bone Tomahawk. It was supposed to be a $500,000 movie that I was just going to go pay for. He ended up writing a $10 million Western. We ended up flirting with Mark Cuban for a while and his company. It ended up didn't happen. And I got a call from Kurt Russell's manager saying, it's do or die time. And so I called up a lender, and I called up my mortgage broker, and I took out a loan on my house, and I financed Bone Tomahawk in 30 days, and we kept it on schedule. And
nice.
It was really personal when every decision,
I was gonna say,
every decision you're making is your cash that is given to you based on the title of your home, right? And so it had to work. But it was so personal, and I put my life and heart and soul into that movie, got it done, and it ended up launching my film career. I since have made 2 other movies with Zoller, Brawl and Cell Block 99, Dragged Across Concrete. I also moved to Texas and have made several films that I'm extremely proud of. The Standoff at Sparrow Creek, a great movie that came out last November called South of Heaven, starring Jason Sudeikis. Many other movies, and then sort of culminated with Run, Hide, Fight, which was another sort of bone tomahawk. I had to put all my guts on the line again. And so through the process of making Run, Hide, Fight, I met Ben Shapiro, and I was a big fan of his. I was a daily listener of his show, which is unique for Hollywood. Probably there are more listeners to Ben Shapiro in Hollywood than they ever would admit.
Well, yeah, you're one of the few who's actually public about it. I'll say that.
I'm proudly public about it.
Right.
But I had met with Ben, had this great conversation, ended up meeting his partner, Jeremy Boring, who's the CEO of Daily Wire. And that turned into not only an opportunity for Run, Hide, Fight to be released through the Daily Wire and in partnership with them, but then subsequently, we ended up building a film business together with them. And so that has now involved Gina Carano, and we made a Western called Terror on the Prairie with her. We've made Shut In, starring Rainey Qualley, and the return of Vincent Gallo to acting, directed by DJ Caruso. And then we've just acquired a movie, which we're going to announce next week as well. So it's really game on. The business is young and still growing and having its own, sort of startup mentality and challenges. But man, it feels good to be on the front lines. And honestly, I'm happier now than I've ever been in my career. So it all led me to this. I mean, I had to go to Hollywood. I had to go through the trenches, all the training. I had to learn how to represent talent, because they're really difficult personalities. Even the easy ones are difficult. I had to learn how to produce a movie with the great Craig Zoller, right? In the director chair. I had to learn how to work with actors like Kurt Russell, Mel Gibson, Vince Vaughn, Guy Pearce, Thomas Jane, Jason Sudeikis, on and on and on.
Right.
So that when the time came for this Daily Wire opportunity, I was ready for it. I mean, this is a career in the making moment for me. Yeah.
It's interesting that, I mean, you have such a fascinating career arc, and I'm curious because one of my big bones that I've talked about incessantly on this show, it feels like Tim would probably roll his eyes if he were here, is one of my goals with my own creative consultancy, which deals a lot with filmmakers like yourself in terms of helping them with marketing and trailers and all the marketing content that goes with releasing films. Is I've always sort of been a huge proponent of pulling the nexus away from New York and LA, because so much of what is done, so much of the audience is outside of those two spheres. And one of my former bosses, Thomas Jagayas at Fox, always used to say, we all live behind gates and work behind gates, but 95% of our audience does neither. And there's a disconnect there. So I'm wondering, do you feel like there's any sort of disadvantage to not being in LA, or do you feel like you got to go back every 5 seconds, or do you feel like this is like the new world order, and that the shutdown sort of has been sort of helpful in terms of pulling the nexus away from New York and LA?
Yeah, the shutdown feels like the executioner, right? Not the not necessarily the accusal, right?
Right.
My issue is this. There's nothing I hate more than pandering or hypocrisy, right? Those are my hills to die on. I like authenticity to the point of martyrdom.
Right.
I don't want to sit there and hear a development executive lecture the writer who spent so much time on this thing and give them their garbage creative instincts, because they're garbage. They are so disconnected from the middle class American moviegoer And so movies feel like this elitist experience through the A24s now, and through the, the Manhattan and Hollywood theaters. They're not, you go to an AMC or a Cineplex these days, and it looks like like they haven't done any work on the place in 20 years.
Yep.
And so you just really have this sort of deep divide. And I'm always a fan of focusing on the true audience that a movie should be targeting, in my opinion.
Right. Yep.
So I have this thing called the Louisiana cousin test, right? So what I do is I call my cousins in Louisiana, or I text them, or my aunts or uncles. They're all on Facebook. They love NCIS. And I challenge them. I say, do you know who this actor is? They have no clue. They have no idea. They've never heard of that person. They didn't see the New York Times style section profile on this person. So they don't care. Yeah. But when you say Vince Vaughn, they have such a reaction. It's a terrific reaction. So we have a movie star problem right now.
Right.
The days of Tom Cruise and Mel Gibson, being the sort of the focus, right? Good for Leo for still being in there, but like even Leo is in full blown propaganda mode. But you look at the current movie stars, and they're not movie stars. They may be decent actors. That's arguable, but they are not movie stars. A movie star can open a movie. Those are gone. They're gone. And so, you have to have Spider-Man or James Bond to open a movie right now. You have to have the IP, right?
Right.
And so I have no interest in making those kinds of movies. And therefore, I want to go right to the source, right? So I see the world in a conservative viewpoint. I tend to spend time in my family, which is more conservative, in my neighborhood, which is more conservative. It's a world that I know, the so-called flyover states, the so-called middle America. It is a world I deeply understand, deeply know. And so I made movies for that audience. Now, I just simply have the juggernaut access and marketing prowess of the Daily Wire. And when Ben Shapiro says, I like this movie, go see it, it means a different level for that audience. And so that's why this has been such a blessing to have this. But to come back to your original point, those film executives love going to film festivals, sitting on those panels, waxing cavalier about their terrible instincts. And it's such a snobby, morally superior outlook. And I'm telling you, that's why movies are bad, because Harvard graduates don't know how to give notes. That's it.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And I brought this up not too long ago when I said the sort of disparity between, like, you take like a Succession and a Yellowstone. When you look at the audience for Succession, it's right around the 2 millions. But that's all anybody's talking about. But then you look at Yellowstone, which is like 15 million, which is unheard of in this day and age. And nobody's really talking about it. So you can see there's a disparity there. You're actually absolutely on point with that. But do you think there's ever going to be a moment where we can sort of pivot back? Because you think of like like you brought up the 90s, and what, that's the 80s and 90s is when I grew up, and like the great movies. And I could write an entire treatise on how Spielberg basically shifted from America's awesome to America sucks in sort of like a span of like 5 years. And you're like, what happened? What, I mean, he was like my hero when I was a kid, and now it's like, do you think there's any way we're ever going to go back, or is it
don't confuse the material. The content that's going to come out over the next 24 months is going to be very soft. Okay. Don't confuse softness for family values. Don't confuse weak characters and this obsession with victim mentalities and all this kind of stuff with somehow the American spirit, right? That is totally different. They will try to shield it. They will try to package it as a movie for the Midwest, but it will not. And it will sucker punch you in the third act. I promise you. So I think that's why it's important to support companies like the Daily Wire who share your values. This audience, this sort of fictional audience member we are speaking of,
Right.
and focus on that. Now it takes time, right? We only have one movie a year apparently, but now we're gonna have a movie, every month or two
Right.
going forward. So it took us a minute to get it going. The budgets are small, right? But the movies are good. Run, Hide, Fight is one of my favorite things I've ever made. Shut In, unbelievable story to me, how I found the script, took it into Hollywood, tried to get it made, right? Couldn't find a way forward. They wanted to change everything in the script. It was a mess. And then finally, when I had the opportunity to take it out, I took it back. And where did I take it? The Daily Wire, right? And they made it in 30 days. I'm so proud of the movie. And then Gina Carano, what a journey that's been with her, to get to making a movie with her. And then we ended up landing on a different script, Terror on the Prairie, which is a really cool Western. It's got a definitely, sort of 60s Sergio Leone vibe to it. Nice. And it's unexpected for Gina Carano to be in a Western like that, with long takes and long lenses and sort of a very sort of understated score, all these different things. So we're on a roll, we're building, it's taking time, but we are on the way. And so I think that's why you start to see, some of the Twitter rumblings and the attacks and things like that, because the Hollywood doesn't like competition, and the critical community far on the left who believe in this utopia that doesn't exist are not going to be happy with a messy, dirty, unwashed group of movie makers making movies that don't fit their perfect agenda.
Right. So yeah, I think you're right. I think there's definitely a sense of that the studios do not like competition outside of their immediate sphere. And listen, I spent some time in development, and it is unbelievable to me how many of the executives I wrote one of my first newsletters that I wrote was about Hollywood as high school. And the one thing I wrote about was, I said, when I got to Hollywood, I was this kid who, I'm gonna date myself. I got my VHSs on Columbia House. I was the one who signed up. I got the 10 free VHSs. I had a massive collection.
Amazing.
I was like a movie geek, and I cinephile. And I got out there, and I was shocked how many people could not place a film pre 1995, early 2000. They had no appreciation for the art of film, the history of film, the history of storytelling. And these were the people that were getting promoted. And I was like, what the hell is happening? Like, how is this possible?
Yeah, that's right.
So it is sort of, to me, I agree with you that there doesn't seem to be a sense that, I think in the 80s and 90s, there was more of an agreement on what our experiment as a country meant as a whole.
That's right.
That's sort of broken now. And now there's sort of disparate visions of what we are and who we are as a country and a people. And you're starting to see that in some of the materials. And that's why you see such divergence between the viewing audience Succession versus a Yellowstone. But I want to pivot just a little bit to talk, we will get to Shut In, by the way, because I do want to talk about that, because it's a great movie.
Thank you.
I want to talk a little bit about the theater experience, because this is something that Tim and I have talked a lot about over the last few months.
Yeah, they're dead.
In terms of, I know. There you go. I hear what you're saying.
I'll clarify, but yes.
Please, but it hurts my heart a little when somebody will say that, because you're probably right. I'm not giving up. I'm still fighting for it.
Yes.
I still believe in the theatrical experience.
Yes.
I saw Power of the Dog on Netflix.
Yeah.
I'm not going to comment on the movie itself.
Yeah.
But there were so many moments that I was like, this would be killer if it was in a theater.
Yes.
And I'm like, I feel like that's missing, because so much of how Jane Campion shoots it, it's very much a theatrical shot. And it's like, this is on my 65-inch TV, and it's losing its effect. And I totally hear what you're saying. And I saw on your Instagram last week, you called out Bob Iger's comment about the fact that theaters are basically
only a year after I said it.
Yeah, I think theaters might be in trouble. I mean, so you said they're dead.
Yes.
So do you think there's any way
they're dead
to
to
come
me?
Back?
They're dead to me. Let me start there. They're dead to me. So for anyone not making Spider-Man, forget about movies, the movie theaters, right?
Yeah.
So the director of Shut In, DJ Caruso, also directed Redeeming Love, which just came out a couple of weeks ago. So that movie they put in, Universal put in 2,000 theaters and just no marketing behind it and things like that. It's really tricky. Even Jason Blum, the king of taking the lowest budget and putting the most marketing behind it in a genre that really plays well in theaters, is making tons of product for Amazon Prime right now. Tons.
Yeah.
He's shifting this movie to digital and this movie to now. Hopefully, this nonsensical response to the pandemic will end soon, and we can get back into the movie theaters in a way that people feel comfortable. But here's the deal: I've been going to the movie theaters since Tenet was released. What was that? August in 2020, right?
Yeah.
So with the exception of whatever's playing on Netflix or the HBO Max releases, which I could watch at home, or the screeners, the Oscar screeners, I went and saw every major theatrical release in theaters since August 2020. Now I have a risk profile that's much higher for my own personal life than other people. Maybe other people are still uncomfortable going to theaters. That's on them. So there's that. There's that issue.
Right.
Theaters. Most of the theaters are still using old technology. They have worn out seats, things like that. Some, not all, but a lot of them, and especially ones outside the major cities. Right.
Yes.
They're old and dusty. So the other thing is, the content is so strong at home, right?
Right.
And YouTube and TikTok have eaten our kids' attention to zero, right? They don't want to sit down. Their brains have changed. It's changed. So for me, I want to keep making the movies that I make at a certain budget I make them at, because it allows me the creative freedom. And then also I want to get into series because the streaming nature is a good fit with the recurring nature of streaming of series, right?
Yeah.
So for me, it was I was watching all my independent distributors get swallowed up by corporations. RLJ got bought by AMC Networks, right?
Right.
Now all of a sudden, my dangerous movies are simply a headache for my executive over there who loves me and loves my movies, but they got kids in private school. They can't touch Run Hide Fight and get in trouble. Why did you buy Run Hide Fight? Now we're getting, hassled by the critics. Like, why'd you do that? Because the movie's awesome. Well, that doesn't matter anymore. Our bottom line and our stock price. Right. AMC in particular got saved last year by the Wall Street Reddit bet stonk investors.
Yeah.
The stock investors lifted the price to a certain level where it triggered a huge piece of their debt out of, I believe, China, had to convert into equity using, Class B stock or whatever it was, and it saved them. They literally wiped a giant bill off their slate. So and then of course, the stimulus packages and stuff. So we're just keeping these theaters on life support.
Right.
Now, don't get me wrong. My glass is empty mentality on this is not a personal preference, right?
Right.
I have a good setup at home, and I know how to watch movies correctly. But I also would greatly prefer to see theaters. I've seen 30 plus movies in theaters since Tenet came back out. That's more than everybody, right? So I just go and I see and I look around and there's no one working there and there's no one in the theater with me. It's a smattering of crowds. Anyway, all this to say, it takes about 90 days to break a habit and it takes 30 days to make a new one. And that's basically the equivalent of like 2 weeks to stop the spread, right? It's over. It's over. So you'll see the Spider-Mans come out. They'll do really well. We'll all go to the theaters, but the theater numbers have to shrink in order to survive. You can't have 6,000 screens right now. It's absurd. Yeah. There aren't that many movies that deserve. Anyway, that's my thoughts.
Well, I hear you in a lot of that. I mean, my big thing is I think if the theaters are really going to survive, they really need to reinvent the experience. And that's sort of always been my thing. It's bringing back some of the classic theaters with the marquees and having pride in the actual experience. Like when you walk in,
Draft House is a great example of those.
Yeah, exactly.
But they just
announced their opening. They're opening some more, which is a great sign. But that obviously, as you said, that's just not I don't know if that's enough. I mean, I'm still a believer that it might survive, but I think there's going to have to be some serious changes in order to really affect that.
Right.
So I want to pivot to Shut In now because listen, I watched it and I have to say I've never watched a movie and felt more anxiety for an hour and a half than when I was watching that film.
Yeah, thank you.
I have to say first of all, I applaud you because I know that you didn't shoot it on a big budget. Yeah. And the way you guys shot it, and DJ Caruso, the way he captured some of the images and the creepy feel of it was great. And it was surprising to me because it went in directions I didn't expect.
Yes.
And I have to applaud you guys for having a little bit of the Christian side of it in there without bonking you over the head of it in terms of which a lot of films do, which I thought was a nice touch. So, what you said is like, when you brought up the fact that you're going to release like a movie like every 6 months, I always go back to that scene in The Holiday when the writer gets up and he's like, he's at the WGA and he's like, yeah, you report box office scores like they're baseball scores now, box office like it's baseball. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, because they release too many damn movies. So it's like, it's nice to hear you say that. So was this sort of like a moment with this movie? Because it really felt like it had that sort of crafting to it. It wasn't just like a sort of like, okay, we got to get this out. Like, okay, let's just do it. And it felt like you guys really kind of massaged it and you worked together to make sure. And I think that's part of like, when you're not rushing to meet a release date, and you're not rushing to sort of get it out because you've got 10 other movies down the pike. I think that craftsmanship really showed. And, was I correct in assuming that, or is it just sort of like it was?
So let's start by saying it all begins with the script. Right. And that doesn't mean it all begins with a script where we sat in a room for 6 months and talked about notes and the third act and the characters' motivations and blah blah blah. I never do that. I'm a caveman, right? Read script, make movie, right? Yeah. With little exceptions. Obviously, we'll tweak here or there for production exigencies and budget challenges, or we'll come up with a good idea and we'll have the writer execute it to his or her specs, because you want to keep it in the vein of the movie. You want to keep it in the voice. Right. Yeah. Melanie Toast wrote such a great script. It was so clear to me that she had spent time going through it herself and putting out the best version possible. So I wanted to respect that. So we shot the original script. Now the original script for too many writers is they finish and then they send it to people for feedback.
Yeah.
With a Craig Zoller or a Melanie Toast, they are sitting there in their apartments or their homes and beating themselves up over every twist, every turn, every moment, and crafting it perfectly. So when I get the script, the first draft, it's been vetted by themselves hundreds, if not thousands of times. So that's an important distinction. So I hate every script except the ones I truly love. There's like no in between for me. The second thing is I wanted a director who had big budget studio experience. It is so important to me that this Daily Wire initiative be competitive with Hollywood. So in the case of Shut In with DJ Caruso, in the case of Terror on the Prairie with Michael Polish, we wanted people who were smart, savvy filmmakers, who loved the script, who would be good partners to us, but also who had a studio background of much bigger budgets, because I wanted it to look big and feel big.
Yeah.
And it does. Yeah. It certainly outkicks its enormously tiny budget, right?
Yeah.
The budget is my problem to shoulder, not the filmmakers in many ways, if we can set up the process correctly. And then I gotta tell you, the guys at Daily Wire, especially Jeremy Boring, who is essentially my producing partner on these movies. Amanda Presmick is my producing partner on the films themselves. Jeremy is my partner on building the movie initiatives. He is always on with me every day on the phone. We're always talking. So me, Amanda, Jeremy, the director, we're so tight. And by the way, we're kind of at each other's throats a lot, but that has to be because if you're going to give a note, you better damn believe in it. Right.
Nice. I like that.
You better be willing to fight for it. Otherwise, if you're unsure, don't have to give a note to give a note. No one's trying to keep a job here. No one's trying to, improve themselves. We already have. So anyway, that's the group. So that's how we put it together. Now, I have very specific feelings about visual effects. My commitment to practical is pretty intense. It sort of fits in my authenticity, martyrdom. And so that for me, the fact that these movies are, 97% practical or above is so important to me. And that's hard these days because everyone wants to just use visual effects. All the, this post-production house or this, editor, whatever. So it's sort of a natural fallback. And I try to explain this to everyone. I don't know if they believe me or they just think I'll give it up later, but no, I'm pretty serious about it. So it was a tough, grueling process to get it to the finish line, but you've seen the final version, and I mean, it's pretty darn good.
And I have to say, I really like the fact that because I was watching it in between trying to get other stuff done, and I was I wanted to dedicate the time. So all right, how many hours of block do I have to? And I looked at it, I was like, hour and a half. I'm like, oh my God, do they make movies like that anymore?
Yeah.
And it just,
I think it's literally 87 minutes or something.
Oh, I mean, it's not a Disney movie. So I'm like, this is awesome. I don't have to block 3 hours to watch it. I'm going to have to for the next Batman movie. So, that was great. And you really the tension, it just builds. And like I said, I just felt the anxiety just building. So
totally.
I want to give you a chance so when it comes out next week, right? Next Thursday?
So so next Thursday evening, 9 Eastern, we are going to put it for free onto YouTube for one stream only. So if you show up 15 minutes late, you can't rewind it, right? So from 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, for that 1.5 hours, you can watch it on YouTube for free. So figure out how to get YouTube on your Apple TV, on your big screen setup, get it all ready and come and watch it. And then if you like it, and if you're inclined to support us, sign up for the Daily Wire, sign up for a subscription. We got tons of stuff coming up, but mostly this is whether you believe in the politics or not, this is a creatively unfiltered, a process of movie making as anything that has existed since Miramax in the 90s or New American Cinema in the 70s. We are bringing it back. We are really, really pushing hard. If you're a fan of those movies and you're sort of sick of the watered down, neutered nature of Hollywood these days, these are going to be for you.
That's great. Well, listen, Dallas, I could probably sit here and talk to you for another 2 hours, but we actually got to wrap. So thanks again for coming on. It's great to have you.
My pleasure.
We can have you back again when Terror on the Prairie is getting ready to rock. And,
let's do it.
And maybe even before that, because I'd love this is my bread and butter. I love talking with people who have a love of film like I do. So
good.
Thanks again for coming on, and best of luck with Shut-In, and everyone tune in next week and check it out. You're going to love it. So Thanks again, Dallas. Appreciate it.
Thank you.